Hello, Mr. Kennedy. My name is Dan Nicewonder, independent media from Pasadena, also KPFK FM's Rebel Alliance News. I'm the grandson of Swiss immigrants, and I know you mentioned that most of the people coming across the border were coming because of money and not because of political asylum. I know my grandparents came here because they wanted a new life here in the United States. That being said, the U.S. Congressional Budget Office's own report that they released last year, from 1989 to 2019, the bottom 50% of the population, economically, was sharing 2% of the wealth. So we have to deal with these issues, and when there is a Kennedy administration, are we going to see a sequel to the New Deal, new jobs programs, regulating Wall Street, securing Social Security? What do you intend to do once you are president of the United States?
I'm a traditional Kennedy Democrat. I think human dignity, and particularly dignity of the workers, and the American middle class are the foundation stones not only of our economy but American democracy. I grew up in a period in American history that economists call the Great Prosperity. It was a period of approximately 50 years, 40 to 50 years following World War II, when the American middle class became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. So at the time that I was a young man, our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And the American middle class was flourishing. We were producing products that everybody in the world wanted. People, when I went abroad, people would do anything to buy Levi jeans that I was wearing. People wanted American cars. In Europe, I traveled a lot with my father and my mother when I was little. And they wanted our electronics, RCA Victrola and radios, and transistor radios, all these things that we had invented. And we were beloved around the world. People loved the United States of America. When I went in 1964, I went to Poland with my dad. Poland at that point was a communist country. And the communists were, my father went without permission from the government. We got the visa across the border. The Polish government, communist government, didn't want us there, and they were doing everything to make sure that the state-controlled press did not report our presence in the country. They never did. And in fact, one day we went to take a bunch of presents that we brought from the United States to an orphanage in Warsaw. And the government had removed all the orphans by the time we got there. So, and we went to Krakow to meet the cardinal, who everybody knew that he was a saint. He'd been tortured and jailed by the communists, and he's an extremely reverential and pious man and an inspiration. He had inspired a resurgence in the Catholic Church in Poland. And we went to his residence, to the Cathedral of the Black Madonna in Krakow. And we were waiting for him, to meet this guy who everybody knew was going to be beatified as a saint as soon as he died. And we went, actually in the kitchen, this is kind of a side story, but it's interesting. There was a priest who made chicken sandwiches for me and my brothers, my mother and father. He spoke English, and he wanted to talk about skiing and what skiing was like in the United States. And that priest who we spent the afternoon with before we were given the audience with Krakow later became Pope John Paul II. And nobody knew we were there, except people saw us when we went in. And when we came out, there were over 1 million people in the plaza outside the cathedral. And they surrounded our car. We were on the embassy vehicle, and my father got us all to crawl out the window. We stood on the top of the car. And I was a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid at that time. And all I did all afternoon was sign autographs for people. And they shook our car. They sang "Sto Lat" to us, which means "May you live forever." It's kind of a national song, an anthem of Poland. People were crying. This wave of emotion was extraordinary because they loved the United States. We were a moral authority around the world. And all of that was taken out of the growth of the American middle class. And every social scientist will tell you that without a middle class, you cannot have democracy. In nations where there's large disparities of wealth, of great wealth above, and an understory of widespread poverty below, is an economic configuration that's too unstable to support democracy. You need a middle class to have democracy, and we are losing the middle class in this country. And we need, that. I'm running for president because that is going to be the focus of everything I do, to restore the American middle class, the economy, the good health, the end of the war economy, which is draining our country, the closure of these bases, and around the world, and bring that money home and rebuild America. At a time when Irish could not participate in the political process in this country, my great-grandfather, Honey Fitz, was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston. My uncle was the first Irish Catholic president of the United States. And when he went back to Ireland, it was the most emotional trip of his life. But the other trip that he loved, that he always said, he and Jackie always said that they loved more than any other, was their trip to Colombia in 1963. And they met at that time, they met Yedis Camargo, who was the president of Colombia, and my uncle and my aunt Jackie said that of all the leaders that they had met during my uncle's presidency, and he had met Charles de Gaulle, they met Eamon de Valera, who was the George Washington of Ireland, and all these other extraordinary leaders, but they said the smartest, most capable leader, the most interesting mind that they had met in all of that time was Yedis Camargo. This was a good foreign policy for our country. And it was a foreign policy that was based on projecting economic power abroad rather than military power. And my uncle, of course, was killed in 1963. When my father ran in 1968, 5 years later, my father had run my Uncle Jack's campaign and served as an attorney general, and then became a United States senator after his death. In June 5th, during the election, the night that my father was killed, he won the state of California, and he won the state largely because of Cesar Chavez. So Cesar Chavez was a very, very close friend to my family. Beginning around 1970, Cesar had one of his primary issues after that was pesticides. And I ended up, because of my role as an environmental lawyer, that I was fighting pesticides. Pesticides disproportionately injure Hispanic farm workers. There's 56,000 Hispanic farm workers who are severely, critically injured by pesticides every year, and their children are terribly, terribly affected by those exposures. A lot of the children have severe learning disabilities because of that, just because of the stuff that's coming off their dad's and their mother's clothing. Oh, Cesar was deeply concerned about that, and I ended up collaborating with him on those issues. During that last 2 decades of his life, Cesar had 2 very large issues. One was pesticides, and the other was the border. Cesar wanted to secure the border because he understood that all of the undocumented migrants who were coming across were easy prey for unscrupulous employers. And they could take advantage of them and pay them much less, and it was impacting and impeding his capacity to get good wages and working conditions for his own workers who were legal and unionized. So I want to pay tribute to this extraordinary American today. I'm so happy that the state of California has designated this weekend Cesar Chavez a holiday in California. And it's an honor that is well-deserved, and I'm very, very proud to participate in helping people celebrate his life. I want to say something about my campaign very quickly, and particularly related to Hispanic voters. Hispanic voters are disproportionately represented in the American middle class. So the issues that affect a working poor in this country, a middle class, disproportionately affect Hispanic voters. Issues like the minimum wage, but mainly the affordability of food, of gasoline, of housing, of healthcare. And these are critical issues for the preservation of the American middle class, which, as I said, if we don't have a middle class in this country, we're not going to have democracy very long. And we've watched it deteriorate. 57% of Americans cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. And if you are part of that group and the gas light comes on in your car, it is the apocalypse. Because you know you're not going to be able to pay the mechanic, and your car is going to die. You're not going to get to work, and then you're going to lose your home. You're going to end up on the sidewalk. And that's more than half the people in our country are in that level of desperation today. And a lot of those are people of Hispanic descent. And if we want to fix this critical issue, we have to fix our whole government. And this broken system that we have now in our country, people say to me every day, you hear, and I'm about to do a press conference after this, I guarantee you, and most of them are going to say to me, are you a spoiler for President Trump or President Biden? That's what they want to know. And I say, well, I'm going to spoil it for both of them. Crowds all over. We get almost equal parts. My wife says this all the time, and our polling shows this. We're getting equal parts Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. I talk to people from all these political parties, every political party all the time, and they say, and if the Republicans say to me, you're going to let Biden in there again, and that's going to be the end of democracy. And the Republicans say, you're going to put Trump in, it's the end of the republic, the end of democracy. And when I look at it, I'm not as panicked as a lot of people are. I think a lot of that panic is orchestrated. We've been taught to fear because people want to keep us in a state of fear, in a state of anxiety, because then we're easier to control and we do what we're told. Here's the way that I look at it. I think that President Trump and President Biden are very, very different in terms of their temperament, their personalities, their ideologies. The language and rhetoric that they use is very, very different. But the issues that they really differ on are mainly cultural issues. They're the issues of abortion, of guns, the border, but most of the other issues, there's really the existential issues, and those are important issues. They're very, very important to many Americans. They should be. But on the existential issues, the issues that could kill this country, there is no difference. There is no capacity to fix those issues. And I'll give you an example. The national debt, $34 trillion. We are now paying more to service the interest on that debt than we're paying for our military budget. So within 5 years, according to leading economists, 50 cents on every dollar that we collect is going to go to servicing the debt. That's not sustainable. Within 10 years, 100% of every dollar we take is going to be required to service the debt. And who drove up that debt? Who created it? Well, it happened over 30 years, but the worst offenders were President Trump and President Biden. In their short terms, 1 term each, the two of them drove up a higher debt than all the presidents since George Washington combined. So, how many, raise your hand if you want more of the same. Okay, because if you do, you should vote for President Trump or President Biden. If you want a change, you need to vote for somebody who's actually capable of changing that. And I don't believe either man is capable of that. I don't think either of them acknowledges the problem. And why is that? It's because they're both the products of a broken system, a system that I describe as the merger of state and corporate power. One of the largest contributors to the Democratic Party is BlackRock. And BlackRock is the company that owns all of the companies, the war companies, the military contractors, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, Boeing, Lockheed, that are profiting from the Ukraine war. BlackRock also owns the contract to rebuild Iraq. So they own the contract to destroy Iraq, and they own the contract to rebuild it. They own all the processed food companies that are giving us chronic disease. And they own all the pharmaceutical companies that are selling them remedies for chronic disease. And as I said, they're one of the biggest single donors in the Democratic Party. They're also one of the single biggest donors to the Republican Party. So they're all part of a duopoly, of a uniparty. They're incapable of changing because they are the product of that system. And this system keeps spitting out bad policies for the American public. And unless you go and change that system by unraveling the corporate capture of our agencies, there's no chance that we're going to get a difference in policies. You know, you'll get it on the marginal issues, on abortion, et cetera, which will never get solved, by the way. But the things that really matter to our lives in terms of making our lives more affordable, making food and childcare and healthcare and housing so that we can afford it, that will never happen under this system. It cannot produce solutions to that problem. We need to change the system. And right now, I'm the only candidate who's talking about that. Another existential problem, and is the product of that broken system, is the chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, 60% have it. Oh, when I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see 1 case of juvenile diabetes in his lifetime, his entire career. Today, 1 out of every 3 children who walk through his office door is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. Did you ever hear President Trump talk about that? Did you ever hear President Biden? It's something they ought to be talking about. Caring for diabetes in this country is now more costly than our entire military budget. Oh, it is critical, and nobody talks about it. No politician talks about it. Because the people who are profiting on it, the Ozempic, people who make Ozempic, right, who are going to try, now the FDA has just said recommended Ozempic for every overweight child when they're a baby. What does it cost? Like, I don't know, 10 grand a year, 20 grand a year? And we're going to be paying for that, and they like it because keeping us sick makes them wealthier. The cost of chronic disease now is $4.3 trillion. That's more than 4 times bigger than our military budget. Well, that's where the money is going from. But you will never hear President Trump or President Biden talk about it. This is what I mean, the existential issues. They're looking at the surface of the ocean and screaming and arguing and fighting about all the little tiny waves on the surface. And below there, where the real problems are, these currents that are sweeping our country away. All right. And what they're doing is, to use another maritime metaphor, is they're changing deck chairs on the Titanic. Right? And the ship is sinking. They're arguing about Obamacare versus single payer versus multiple pay, public partnership, public-private payer system. And all that does is it reassigns who's going to pay the cost, the rising cost of chronic disease. It doesn't deal with the problem. It's like Ozempic. It's like Ozempic. Ozempic, your doctor says, oh, you have a weight problem, take Ozempic. And go ahead and continue to eat, the way that you've been eating, poison food. And what we need to do, we need to stop eating the poison. It's not going to change. These two men who are, I believe President Trump intended to drain the swamp, but he came into office saying, I'm going to drain the swamp. I think he was sincere. Then he appointed John Bolton to run the NSA. He's like the prototypical swamp creature. He appointed Scott Gottlieb, who's a business partner of Pfizer's, to run the FDA. And Scott Gottlieb did a $100 billion favor for his business partner, and then went back to join the board of Pfizer, where he is today. 6 of the last 7 FDA commissioners are now working for the pharmaceutical company that they did favors for. That's how they collect their payoffs. That system is never going to change because President Trump and President Biden and the DNC and the RNC are funding their campaigns through Pfizer. And they're dependent on the mainstream media, which is getting 70% of its evening news division, the news that they're all looking at, revenues from those same companies. How many of you have heard brought to you by Pfizer? And how are we going to change a system that is financing our campaigns? We can't do it. And what they do is they depend on, instead of democracy, instead of being honest, first of all, the government just lies to us, right? Are you tired of the government lying to you? Do you want a candidate who's going to not lie to you? Who's going to tell the truth? They're lying to us, and they're lying to us because they don't want to allow us to make informed choices, to make rational choices about either the drugs that we take, the food that we eat, or the future of our country. And we need to have the truth for that reason. And President Biden, the New York Times reported this week that the Biden campaign now has $1.1 billion that it's raised. It's going to have $3 billion. It's double the biggest campaign in history. More is going to be spent on this presidential campaign. He's going to spend a lot of it trying to make sure I don't get on ballots. But when I was a kid, my father's Democratic Party and John Kennedy's Democratic Party was fighting to make sure every American had the right to vote. Today's Democratic Party is trying to end our right to vote, your right to vote for me. They're trying to get me off the ballot in this state. They're spending millions and millions of dollars to do that. And then also to slander, to lie. I mean, I was very happy today to see the protesters outside. And when our staff interviewed them, they said, yeah, we were all paid to be here. And their posters were all written by the same guy. One of them had a poster that said, shame on you, RFK, for stopping the COVID vaccine, which, by the way, I didn't do. And it said, shame on you. One of our staffers said, "Did you take the COVID vaccine?" And he said, "Hell no." And they all said, "Yeah, we were paid to be here. We don't care." But I'm glad, because I'm glad that the DNC and the White House are finally are doing something to help poor people in this country. All of these issues, like I said, ending the war machine, it can't end the war machine because the companies that are financing them are the companies that profit from the war machine. And that's why when I was a kid, the Democratic Party was the anti-war party, the Republicans were the war party. Today, they're both the war party. They're both the party that is against democracy. You know, both of them are saying, we got to destroy democracy in order to save it. We got to make sure nobody votes in order to save democracy. Think about that. This is the level of cognitive dissonance that they're trying to get you to swallow. And we're not going to swallow it, are we? No! The fulcrum of this problem is the capture of our agencies. And I've sued almost every one of these agencies. When you sue them, you get a PhD in how to unravel corporate capture. I've sued FDA, CDC, NIH, EPA, USDA, DOT, all of these agents, EPA, probably more than any other attorney. So, and all of them, if you look at, you know, the CIA is captured by the military-industrial complex. The FDA is captured by the pharmaceutical industry. The USDA is captured by the big ag and the processed food companies, and so on. And they're no longer serving the interest. The Fed is captured by Wall Street bankers, and its whole disposition, its whole purpose is to shift wealth upward to this new oligarchy of billionaires and to rob the American middle class and destroy Main Street businesses and take the sovereignty and the power away from the American people. And, you know, we just need to convince enough Americans that they're done, that enough is enough. We don't want it anymore. I need your help. I need you to go out, particularly now in California. We need to sign up 75,000 people for the We the People Party. Okay, Kennedy24/California, I will walk you through. We need 75,000 people to do that. Go to your gym, sign up people, go to your, go to the health food store, go to the go to the places where you're gonna see a lot of Team Kennedy people and tell them, sign me up. They got $1.5 billion they're gonna spend to try to stop you from doing that. And we need a new American revolution in this country. At my announcement 9 months ago in Boston, you give me a sword and some ground to stand on, and I'm going to take your country back for you.
When I say Viva, you say Kennedy. Viva! Viva!